everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Naked Diner podcast. I'm Jack. With me, as always, is Mr. Andy Hall.
Andy Hall. That is who I am. And
our guest this week is Lucien Greaves from the Satanic Temple.
I'm very excited by this. So, Lucien, I was looking through your bio, and I noticed, and this is kind of like an oblique way of talking about modern day witch huntery, but I noticed that you were at Harvard during the time that, who was that professor? It was Professor Mack over at the medical school who was doing all this wacky stuff about UFO abductions.
Right. Well,
I didn't know if you...
I never met the guy. I don't. In fact, I don't remember when he died.
It was like 2000, early 2000s.
Okay, he got hit by a car with some drunk driver in London, I think it was, and he died. And I knew as soon as he did die that his crowd was going to be claiming that he was murdered, that he was taken out for knowing too much about aliens or whatever. And sure enough, when I started going to do research amongst people who believe that they've been abducted by aliens and their support groups and things like that, there was a discussion about how they took out John Mack. It didn't matter that they caught the guy. The guy was obviously drunk and charged, and that the whole situation was well known. In the conspiracy world, nobody dies without a reason.
Right.
You just don't die unless you're taken out. But no, John Mack was another one of those cases where because there was no other kind of common comorbid symptoms along with this alien abduction of symptoms of psychiatric problems, that the stories must have been true. And that's similar with the other false memory cases where they claim if there's nothing else that goes along with it, that the claims themselves can't be false, apparently, if there's no psychiatric diagnosis to attach to it.
Sure.
Never mind that the claims themselves are so outrageous as to be dismissed on their very face of them, or that they're provably false. They're true. They're true in this world just based on the fact that there's no diagnosis to be put along with it yet.
Yeah, it's completely unfalsifiable.
That seems to be a big bag of logical fallacies there.
Yeah. And it doesn't say much for the field of psychiatry in general, especially when it comes to dissociative identity disorder and other types of problems where they have only these reports based off of recovered memory recall, and refuse to acknowledge that this is a very problematic way of deriving memories from people. But to say that they must be true only because they're not due to schizophrenia or something of the type is that seems a bit insane in and of itself.
So tell me about the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Disassociation. It sounds like a rather benign kind of organization.
Yeah, well, they mean to sound benign, and if you look at their website, it looks very professional and well organized, and claims to be just an organization that studies the effects of trauma, and in further researches the phenomenon of dissociation in its many forms. But what it is it's the really the final refuge of professionals in the mental health field who still cling on to the multiple personality disorder diagnosis, though just about every protocol in the diagnostic features of this has been debunked. And this idea that traumatic memories are repressed into separate personalities is also highly debunked and obviously harmful. That we see that it was primary in causing the satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s. So a lot of people have this kind of nostalgic recollection of when we were searching for backwards masked messages in heavy metal music, and Dungeons and Dragons was supposed to cause suicides and lead one to cult murders and Satanism and all kinds of bizarre activities.
Well, I mean, seriously though, I mean, if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal leading to Satanism, I'm hardly somebody who can argue the point.
Well, the idea was that it led you to satanic cult activity that was prevalent in the background of society as this kind of invisible cabal working to undermine all the social good by engaging in acts of cannibalism, murder, uh, incestuous rites, and other types of things that weren't happening at all. And the evidence for these claims was based primarily on recovered memories of people who go through hypnotic regression or other types of recovered memory therapies in the course of multiple personality disorder treatment. And the idea was that these people who were alleged to have multiple personality disorder couldn't recall the traumas that caused them to have this condition, so that they needed to be dug out through these types of therapies. And what we found was that they tended to confabulate memories that were well in line with what the therapists had already believed. And there's a very kind of depraved grouping of therapists who like to titillate themselves with stories of child rape through the buffer of being these dogged investigators into this cult world that was existent at the time.
How spread was the panic back in the 80s and early 90s?
It's hard to say, because it seems that to me, this was such a story, and there's a lot to be learned from it. This was essentially modern times that this took place, and maybe it's out of embarrassment that there's been that there hasn't been enough academic research into the Satanic Panic. But it was certainly prevalent also in the UK and Australia. And I think that we're seeing manifestations of the Satanic Panic in other places in the world. It never quite ended. It lost media favor. But that brings us back to the ISSTD. There was never repercussions against the bad therapy, the bad practices that brought this on. And they still propagate these ideas. Now it's more insular, and they kind of just ruin their clients' lives by convincing them that they've undergone this type of abuse, or that they have traumas that are buried in the backgrounds of their mind, even as it doesn't align with what we know about cognitive science, doesn't align with what we actually know about how trauma works. So this movement is still there. And certainly we see the witch hunts in Africa now manifesting themselves in Western language, more in tune with the bullshit that Alex Jones spews or other Illuminati conspiracy theorists. But at the end of the day, all those types of destructive witch hunting conspiracy theories seem to come down to the evidence provided by the irresponsible quackery of just plain outright depraved organizations like the ISSTD that harbors still pretty much all the mental health professionals that will still spread this conspiracist bullshit.
Do you think the people who are conspiracist stuff, do you think that they're mentally ill?
That's always a really interesting question. I've investigated a lot of people, and the question has been whether they're just con men or con women, or whether they themselves are insane. There's never a clear line between the two. And I think what I found is that there's a lot of self-deception along with the deception. And there's a certain amount of want or need for somebody to believe something that's plainly false. There's a certain amount of conscious collusion along with their deep-rooted delusion, if that makes any sense. There's a certain willingness to hang on to the delusional belief no matter how mentally ill somebody might be. There's a certain need for that. So it's never quite clear. So yeah, I meet some of these therapists or talk to some of these psychiatrists or whatever. Like take a guy like Colin Ross. He was pretty much instrumental in building the multiple personality disorder scare of the 80s and the 90s, and got deeply invested in these ideas of satanic ritual abuse. And the man is insane in his absurdity. He would tell these stories about how he had multiple personalities that would also engage in astral travel above the hospital ward that he was running. He claims that he has the paranormal ability to shoot I-beams out of his eyes that can be recorded on certain instruments because he doesn't know how to use those instruments. And he just makes one absurd claim after another. If you look at our website, grayfaction.org, and check out our cast of characters where we list some of the insanity of some of these in the mental health professional field. And we have an entry on Colin Ross, so the list just goes on and on. I don't remember why I started talking about him, but he's a good case in point. And yeah, I mean, it is difficult to know whether at what point is he just being a con and at what point is he genuine.
Right, because you're really not sure whether they're buying their own bullshit or...
We may never know. He may never know.
Because there's no real way to distinguish between whether somebody is really believing it or...
A true believer.
Yeah, or the other way around, where they just think that it's expedient to their career to kind of sell this story.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess kind of a more interesting case study on that for me was this guy Ted Gunderson, and I did a couple lectures about him. I did one lecture that's broken into two parts on YouTube online right now that I gave from our Salem headquarters. But during the Satanic Panic, he was this former FBI special agent in charge, and he was promoting these ideas of a satanic conspiracy, of this threat of CIA mind control and FEMA death camps up into the Obama administration and chemtrails, everything. There was nothing this guy didn't believe. It was all absurd. I mean, not all of it was absurd. Some of these conspiracy theories have a ring of plausibility to it.
Sure.
But overall, if you took Ted Gunderson's narrative, he claimed to have inside knowledge of all types of things, and some of these things were so absurd as to be dismissed on the very face of them because they were ludicrous. And he would use psychics. He would use, he seemed to have a lot of superstition, a lot of supernatural beliefs that, in my mind, can be dismissed on the face of them. Mm-hmm. But he was very difficult to distinguish as to at what point was he just a con man and at what point was he a true believer. Because on the one hand, he was doing this kind of talk circuit, and he was obviously trying to build some kind of business off of what he was doing. On the other hand, he had these delusions. He clearly had some delusions because he was doing things that were not in his own best interest based upon those delusions. And so when he would claim that he was on the run from the FBI because he knew too much about the satanic cult conspiracy, and then you find out that he was actually laying low because the FBI was investigating him for financial fraud in a business he had set up, then he's being a con, But when you see this disheveled old man running away from his own house because he feels that secret agents have put poison in the vents in his walls, then you think, well, that's genuine delusion and that this guy is suffering.
Sure.
And no clear answer on that. Like I said, I feel like there's an interplay between the deception somebody's projecting out onto the world and self-deception, maybe as part of somebody's cognitive dissonance because they don't want to believe themselves to be a mere con that they're trying to convince themselves. But even amongst the mentally ill, who are putting forward these really bold conspiracy theories sometimes, I feel like there's a certain amount of willingness to embrace that conspiracy.
Yeah, I remember reading several of the transcripts from all that McMartin trial stuff, and what really struck me about it was how manipulative he was as a prosecutor. Like when he was asking the kids, you know, do you think that this happened? And the kid was like, no, I don't remember that happening at all. And he would then say, well, all the other kids remember this happening. Don't you want to be like the other kids and be right and whatever? And it was just so witness leading that I was genuinely shocked that it happened in the American court system, you know?
Yeah, that was another major factor in the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, and that's why this is such an important field of study. It shows us how secular law can go wrong on bad ideas, and what absolutely needs to be reformed. And to a large degree, the questioning of children has been reformed since the moral panic of the 80s and 90s related to this idea of satanic daycare cult abuse, starting with McMartin preschool and going on through various others. But but we still see in local jurisdictions just this abuse of questioning tactics that are obviously leading and obviously meant to coerce confessions out of people. And I still think there needs to be greater oversight. And as you said, they would question these children, and the children quite knew that they weren't getting out of this situation until they gave the answers that were wanted. And it was very clear what answers they wanted. And when they said they had not been abused, they were not being believed. And they were being told that, even outright, that they were being unintelligent, or that they were not doing what the other children had done, not admitting to what the other children had admitted to. And it became very clear what was being looked for, to the point that the children would give these kinds of false confessions. But the worst part about that was some of those kids, they're like 3 years old. That's before the offset of childhood amnesia. Most people don't remember that time of their lives after they grow up. You have very vague memories. So after a time, it seems that some of these kids, or as they grew up, believed that some traumatic thing must have happened to them. And that's similar to the recovered memory therapy problem, when people would go under hypnosis or to have other types of recovered memory therapy to try to recall this trauma that was assumed to be there. People come to believe that this actually must be true. They're trying to work with the authority of somebody who has credentials in mental health. They're trying to work with this person to get through whatever melees they suffer. So they're doing their best, and it becomes clear, if only at an unconscious level, of what types of answers are being sought before they can move forward and heal. And that's how people develop these very explicit, very damaging false memories.
Sure.
Harvard actually did a study on false memories. You got the alien abduction cases. And the idea was that you can look at the alien abduction cases, and if you're a certain type of skeptic like myself, you just take it at face value that these narratives are untrue. I mean, if you don't think that, if you think alien abduction cases may be true, then this isn't very convincing. But they wanted to see if the alien abduction narratives were reacted like real traumas in the people who held them, as a way of proving that false memories could be traumatic memories. So they tested people's psychophysiological responses to script-driven narratives related to alien abduction in the people who claimed they had been abducted by aliens. And what they found was that their reactions to these narratives of their abduction were the same as the traumatic responses people with PTSD, to real corroborated traumas that they actually suffered. So it goes to show that you can cultivate a false memory into a real trauma, and that's a very disturbing thing to know. It's disturbing to know that you can be implanted with a false memory, a traumatic false memory, that can be just as crippling to you in your life as something that as a very real trauma.
Right, because these are people who are going to therapy for ostensibly to find actual help, and they end up making the entire situation much worse by doing this thing.
Right. Well, just an absurd case study we have on grayfaction.org is the case of Roma Hart, and you can find that in the Colin Ross story because she was a patient. Roma Hart was the name of a patient from Manitoba, and she's agreed to have her name out there and her story out there, and she wants everybody to know what happened with her and Colin Ross because Colin Ross is still in practice and he should really be in prison. But she actually had gone in. She was a student at the time where she had first met with Colin Ross, and she had hurt her foot or something like that, and she was trying to extend her medical leave because she was working 2 jobs and going to school, and she was really hoping to get more time away from her jobs to focus on school, and she was a single mother, so she had a lot going on, and so she went in for assessment, and he was speaking to a graduate student or a nurse practitioner or somebody attached to Colin Ross in some way. And she was asked how she managed all these things at once. And she gave some benign statement like, sometimes she's just operating on autopilot. And the woman said, well, that's interesting. That sounds like multiple personality disorder. So she had her assessed by Colin Ross, and Colin Ross judged her to indeed have multiple personality disorder. And this led ultimately to her being an inpatient in the psychiatric ward, put on massive amounts of narcotics, psychiatric medication. In fact, once this came up to the courts, one expert witness, another psychiatrist, I believe, judged it to be the worst case of medical malpractice he'd ever seen, given to the over medicating. And that amount of over medicating, along with this therapy telling her she needs to recall these memories, had her ultimately recalling memories of having been impregnated by aliens to give a hybrid baby, and that her cult was her family was part of some satanic cult, and all these things that she didn't quite clear herself of until she came off those medications and got herself back into the real world and was able to get back into her rational mind again. In that case, you see somebody, she had like a broken foot or something, and it leads to this. So sometimes you're not even necessarily talking somebody with other psychiatric symptoms. It seems that anybody who puts their trust into this type of therapy to begin with, or these fundamental ideas, can be permanently emotionally crippled by them thereafter. Yeah, this is a case of the mental health field spreading the worst types of mental health disorders.
Yeah, and it's just amazing how complicit everyone was at the time, and how willing they were to go along with this idea just because they were scared of...
Yeah, it's a utter failure of oversight. I mean, as I said, the science is resolved on these types of things. You take the works of like Elizabeth Loftus and other people who've studied the science of false memories, repeatable experiments that they've put forward to really rest the case on this. Works by guys like Dr. Richard McNally at Harvard, who's shown that even people who are supposed to have dissociative identity disorder really are sharing memories between these personalities. They have subtle ways of finding these things out. To the point where this diagnosis is debunked as anything other than a culture-bound disorder. And yet the utter failure of the oversight boards to do anything about a treatment regimen that's proven to be harmful. That's the real disgrace that we're working against. That's really what Gray Faction within the Satanic Temple is all about.
Okay, now here's the thing that interests me, because I really want to talk about which came first. Were you more involved in the satanic movement and then you found all this satanic ritual abuse stuff, or did the satanic ritual abuse stuff start first, and then you got more and more involved into Satanism?
Well, you know what? That's something actually that I don't even know the answer to, because it was pretty simultaneous. When I was a kid, the Satanic Panic was in full swing, and I feel like I was abnormally aware of it as a kid,
Okay.
because abnormally I say because it wasn't necessarily a big deal in my local community. I remember people were talking about it, and there was that opportunity for people to educate themselves about it and things like that. But I was extremely curious about it because things on TV and you hear these things talked about, and then it seems really bizarre when it's not of the most primary importance in people's minds. I mean, if this is actually going on,
Uh-huh.
something needs to be done. And I remember the Geraldo specials with Beyonce, Sally Jesse Raphael, that irresponsible piece of shit Oprah, who somehow seems to have been absolved of all the horrific things she's done in our culture and all the idiotic ideas she's propagated. Um, so that really drew me to be interested in what Satanism really is, because as I grew up and looked at these things, the more apparent, of course, it was that at least some of these claims related to the Satanic Panic must not have been true.
Sure.
But what is Satanism? And why who are these people, and was there any truth to it at all? And that kind of became a lifelong inquiry. And it didn't take long when I as a child began to have diminished trust in the institutions around me, especially the religious institutions, and began to see the whole story backwards. Began to see the depravity of the mainstream traditional religious organizations, and then you know attach myself, grow an affinity for the satanic narrative. Um, yeah, but then it was much later I started actually getting back to the uh, the real conspiracist depths of the Satanic Panic and taking that fight on again. And I was started doing that again before the Satanic Temple was formed, but at that point I was already well into self-identifying as a Satanist, at least to myself. Maybe not at large.
All right, gang. So here's what happened at this point in the show. At this point, Andy had dropped off the call and come back, and we realized that Andy's connection on the show wasn't very good at all. So we had to figure out what we were going to do. Basically, what happened here was that Andy just dropped off the show, said his goodbyes, and me and Lucien kept going on with the show from there. So we're just going to pick this back up where I actually start getting back into questions with Lucien. And Andy said his goodbyes, apologized for having a crappy connection. This was part of the computer problem that we talked about that we've been having on and off, depending on whose computer and where we are and all of that. So there's no point rehashing what the actual issue was with the audio. But so basically, Andy falls off, and it's me and Lucien for the rest of the show. And that's just how this is going to happen. So we'll pick this back up where we actually start having actual questions again. Sorry about this, but, hey, needs must, right? All right, man, I'm sorry about that. So, all right, fine. Andy's not on the show.
You know what? Fuck that guy.
Yeah, I just, he's been having laptop issues lately, and I guess we just need to figure out some new equipment stuff, and we'll see how that goes. And, it is what it is. It's just the way the show's going to be.
Oh, you guys can have me on anytime.
Oh. Yeah.
Don't have to discard this one, but you can have me on again too. Don't.
Oh no, I'm not going to throw this out.
Yeah, anytime.
Great. So I think what I want to get into next is it seems to me that the Satanic Temple, in addition to all the political action stuff, the Baphomet statues and after school Satan clubs and that kind of thing, what you seems to me has been going on in the community has been this kind of push to make a more to make the religiosity of it more pronounced, right? This idea that uh, the underlying ethos of Satan as a figure has definitely been coming more to the forefront, and it's been causing this kind of weird push and pull with the atheistic community, because there are ones that aren't particularly interested in any sort of religion at all, and we seem to be getting more religious.
Yeah, I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday. I think we've all gotten far more religious, and I think it's just probably a natural byproduct of the environment we're in right now, and the strides the theocrats have made. Um, I don't think we've ever viewed ourselves as a joke, but it was far easier to be to be a little less invested on a day-to-day basis in this, I think, and people could identify, almost part-time and do their projects on the side and have their careers and forget about it after a while. But the fight is so is so real right now, that I feel like people are really drawing their battle lines and bring down. I feel the mood has changed significantly.
Right, but I think what trying to get to is this idea where there's a large contingent of the atheist community that for the longest time they were supporters, but mainly because they've always thought of the Satanic Temple as kind of like, an atheist troll, quote unquote, organization. And now that this religiosity is coming to the fore and we're making more of a point of saying, yeah, this is what we really believe.
Right. And part of that I think is my own fault too, because I felt like I wasn't very concerned about that up front. I felt like people who would get it, and people who didn't get it, well, if there's still supporters, that's fine too. And I still feel that way, but to a certain degree. But I really do want people to understand that this is an authentic religious movement, and that for those of us who identify with it, uh, that identification is something you can't take away from us, and it's certainly not something that's arbitrary. And the calling ourselves Satanists, as we're always accused of doing, isn't just something we do to shock the Christians. It's something that's very much a part of us.
Sure.
And that was something I didn't bother to. I don't think I bothered to express up front too explicitly, like I said, because I felt that would ultimately come through in what we're doing. That our actions were very much satanic. That kind of activism we were doing, and even people who would align with us and feel that they didn't have an affinity towards Satanism, I felt that it would be completely legitimate if they realized that what they were doing, was in line with these deeply held beliefs to a point that they could embrace Satanism in a very real way.
Sure.
But however, we're big enough now, and we have enough people, and we're at that point where I feel like it should be obvious to people that this is not a joke, and that this is, we have all these kinds of localized communities and different various chapters, that it grows far more annoying to me now to see this kind of criticism that we're merely atheist trolls, and it seems it seems like something worth confronting.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely.
What's your experience with that?
Well, for me, I mean, I was coming from the atheist community to begin with, so I already had that kind of baked in atheist trolley thing.
Right.
So for me, the thing that's really become a sticking point is this idea that the atheists who are on board with what we're doing, but ultimately go out and still propagate this idea that we're somehow some sort of fake religion, that we don't really have a good ethos that we're really trying to make a point of, like there's a thing there.
Right. It's funny because I think you lay it out for people like that, and it's still a hard sell. I think up until the point where you ask them, all right, now start comparing us to other religions and tell us where we fail. Look at the Christian community and tell us, are their deeply held beliefs more deeply held? Is the fact that they're willing to claim some kind of superstitious belief, even though they have only a rudimentary understanding of what's in the Bible at all, and yet you still take at face value their Christian authenticity? Is that really a fair assessment? And there's still going to be some kind of reticence, but I think once you start turning the tables and say, okay, now put us up to comparison, then it's a bit of a different story. But maybe not.
Well, I think the thing is that there's this group in the atheist community that is inherently anti-religion, and the problem with that is that they are completely opposed to any sort of pluralistic idea of how a society can run. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's this idea that they need to eliminate religion completely, and if we're an actual religion, then we're not on their side.
Well, I read a book not too long ago called American Apocalypse, I think it was, and it was about the rise of the evangelical movement. And according to this, evangelical movement really started taking hold in the mid 19th century in the United States. It was a very prevalent position amongst Christians that the Bible was metaphorical itself. In metaphorical in almost, I believe, every way. This idea, it wasn't really taken seriously that the second coming was either. That just none of the supernatural elements. So this idea of non-theistic religion is not a bold new maneuver, and it's not this kind of ploy just to justify oneself. And I feel like it is becoming more apparent. This was another thing I was talking about the other day. I feel like I've somewhat lost my sense of humor, and I have a feeling that that's going to show through as I give further lectures at atheist conferences that I'm often invited to and things like that. And I don't know how that will play off with that audience. I wonder if people will start liking me less in that crowd, or if they'll accept that. I don't really know. But
you mean like there's a concern that the religiosity will just be a kind of a turnoff?
Well, I think well, when I think about the presentations I'll put together, I usually used to manufacture these presentations for the crowd that I was going to speak to, which only makes sense. So you see these things on YouTube where I'm speaking to different atheist groups, and I concentrate really on our church-state battles. I talk about, and there's inherent humor in that, because even when we don't mean things to be humorous, the idea of Satanists coming into the public square and demanding equal placement to the Christian bullshit that's always been there, it seems so outrageous to people that they can't help but laugh.
Sure.
So I talk about these things, and there's usually seen to be a bit of humor value to it. So when I change my talking points and I talk more about the justification of Satanism as a legitimate religion, I tend to wonder if that's going to make people think, well, now these guys take themselves too seriously, or this isn't fun anymore, or whatever else. We haven't changed our point of view at all. The focus on what I speak about might have changed, but I do wonder how that will change perceptions of me within the atheist world.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it does seem like for the longest time of the atheist community, there was a prevailing sense and idea that atheism wasn't about being anti-religion. It was just about being non-theistic and not believing in a god, and that was okay. And they always pointed to Buddhism as a point there, saying, well, Buddhists are religious and they don't believe in a god. And that was a pretty common talking point for years, as far as I can remember.
Right.
But that narrative seems to have shifted over time to be one of an argument against a pluralist secular society into one that says that it's really anti-religion, and saying religion is inherently a problem and that needs to change, and that's been happening for a while.
Right, and that's fine by me. They can fuck off. I feel like it's been the most backward thing for the atheist community this idea of anti-religion, and I hate that language. And it's not that I'm for this kind of conciliatory, we have to try to respect somebody's superstition so long as it doesn't impede upon us. I think anytime somebody has some superstition, there's a certain danger, especially if they feel that this superstition is necessary for everybody to adhere to in the world, before there can be this kind of utopian vision realized. Obviously, that's wrong. But religion to be defined as involving superstition has not had any benefits towards the atheist community. And I always invoke Jefferson when Jefferson talks about religious freedom, and talks about how belief, non-belief, and the religious opinions of heretics need to be equally protected along with anybody else's. Obviously, when he was talking about religious freedom, he meant the heretical positions and non-belief as religious positions, religious opinion. And once you start defining yourself out of the religious dialogue as a non-believer, insisting that religion is only defined by superstition, you're defining yourself out of religious protection. See any benefit in that whatsoever. So just on a pragmatic level, I would think that anti-religion crowd would change their language and embrace the idea that, they at least have a religious opinion, right? If they don't want to call their deeply held beliefs a religion, well, fine. But it's certainly backwards to shit all over the idea of non-theistic religion and insist that religious protections are only available for the superstitious.
Sure. Well, Lucien, we're coming up on the end of the hour. One of the things that we like to do at this point in the show is to ask the guest if there's anything that you wanted us to bring up or talk about as a topic that we didn't bring up. So what do you got there?
I have the perfect answer for that one. No.
Great.
No, and that's always the part where I feel like I should really have something, some knockout punch, but I never really do.
Oh, don't feel bad about that. A lot of our guests have been stymied by that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that just leaves the inevitable plugs. Where can people find you if they want to find out more about the Satanic Temple or Grey Faction or any of the other stuff that you're working on?
Well, I already mentioned greyfaction.org, but I do encourage people to check that out because that's one of it's certainly the lesser known campaign of the Satanic Temple that I think is of vital importance.
Sure. That's really one of the things that I'm surprised it doesn't get more coverage.
Well, it takes a lot more research for a journalist to invest themselves in that, especially as we're naming names and we're making claims about things that are supposed to be established in a professional field, and so we don't have that journalistic confidence to jump in and say one thing or another. It's far easier to take these soundbitey things and just say, and just talk about what the Satanic Temple is doing on other campaigns. Those are very straightforward facts. But yeah, beyond the greyfaction.org, just please keep up with us on the satanictemple.com or follow our Facebook page, and you can follow me at Twitter on @Lucien Greaves. So I think that's my social. I feel like I've fulfilled my social media responsibilities by mentioning all those.
All right then. So keep in touch, and anytime that the Satanic Temple or Grey Faction or whatever has anything else going on, obviously you're always welcome to come back.
Great, thank you so much. Anytime.
No, this was great, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.